Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we are once again failing to only cover the first and possibly last episode of Moon Knight because frankly, this show was written for this podcast pretty much. We've got conversations about good and evil, we've got conversations about different identities, we've got conversations about do you have to let someone actually do the bad thing before you punish them for the bad thing? We're going to find out. All that and more after commercial break. We have no control over. Welcome back. This is Matthew, your host. I'm excited today because we're going to be talking with both Paul Hoppy and Will Freeland. Paul, our normal guest, and Will Freeland, the one of the two co-hosts of the Hype is Your Superpower podcast, who's been great source about comic books and all things comics. Last time we had him on to say, cool, we want you to talk to us all about this character. But actually, we're so excited not to be spoiled, don't tell us about him. Now we know a lot more, so we can probably get into more of it. So, yeah, Will, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing swell. This is a great break for me because work has been hectic. And so I'm giving myself a break from me so I can get some nerdy talk in. I don't get a whole lot of opportunities for that.
Awesome. And yourself, Paul?
I'm doing good, but before we get to all the heavy stuff, I gotta know, Will, what do you think of the suit?
Oh,
the suit.
I like it.
Okay,
I like it. That is.
I saw that and I thought
so
of you
amazingly copied straight from the comics.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And it was one of the things that I tried to not talk about last episode.
Well, I'm glad because it really, I don't know, I really enjoyed that bit as a bit of like not super consequential in terms of like character and whatever, but like not, right. It's just a thing. But that kind of, I think, mix of comedy and sort of character-based humor, I think, plays really well when it's surprising.
I will say that the words white suit from Moon Knight have been in my Google search history. There's not much coming up now, but I think in about 24 hours there will be some options on there. So who knows what I'll be wearing come next episode.
Oh, for ordering to wear.
It does have a name.
Okay.
In the comics, that is Mr. Knight.
Oh.
Mr. Knight. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Complete with when he decides he's going to fight, taking off the jacket, rolling up his sleeves, leaving the gloves on. Oh, amazing.
That was really fun to watch. So yeah, let's dive into it. Overall, kind of, what did y'all think of this episode?
I really liked it. I think I liked it more than the first. It kept me very much engaged. When the Mr. Knight suit first showed up, my jaw dropped. There were a couple of like editing decisions that I thought was kind of odd. And we can go into those as we go through the episode. But overall, I really liked it. I liked having this person who was the previous avatar of Khonshu acting as the kind of an antagonist because what Khonshu does isn't enough. Or something like I don't know. It was fun. It was very much a introduction to the conflict episode.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah, I felt like I mostly enjoyed this episode a ton. I still love the show. This time I have two complaints that I'll enjoy talking about at the end. To quote, I think, Frasier, what's better than a perfect dinner? A perfect dinner with one small flaw that we can nitpick for the whole evening. So
that is one definition of some of our podcast episodes.
Exactly.
So, yes.
So overall, I'm still loving it. I hate that I quoted a McDonald's slogan, and I hate that I've seen enough commercials that I know that. But there's two things I'll get to at the end. But I thought this was rife with ethical questions. I felt like I realized a moment before it was revealed that Emmett was the previous avatar of Khonshu. I thought that was really cool, kind of the way they got to that. And I enjoyed also the conversations between Mark and Steven as well. And the dynamic between Steven and Layla, I thought was great when they introduce her. And like, she doesn't know who he is. She thinks he's, the other him basically. And
right.
and he doesn't know her, but he's like, oh wow, you're great, like you're like perfect for me. And I don't know, I think I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I definitely really enjoyed her. I also have an editing question related to the suit, so we'll be curious to see if we have the same one. I think I like the first one more because it just had, to me it was more like setting everything up, whereas this was, I'm always torn because like it's very different kind of genre, but I just finished Bridgerton. I love romantic tension. I love will they, won't they kiss moments. But there's an extent to which eventually you gotta resolve it. You know, you gotta do your thing or get off the pot. And that show, like a lot of them, I kind of felt went too long. It was starting to get to that point with me where it was like, okay, here's one more thing we're not sure of, and one more person who's not giving Steven answers. That I was just starting to get like, I need some actual answers. And then when he started to have that conversation with Steven, with Mark, where we found out all this stuff, I was like, okay, cool. Now I'm seeing how all the pieces are all fitting together. I'm liking the image we're getting. There's one part that I'm still confused by, but I think overall this is making a lot of sense. So, well, actually, let's do this. And Paul, this may be one of the things you're saving for the end, but both because this was an issue we talked about last episode and one that's come up on Facebook some, and we talked about the meal, so this might have been what's spoiling the meal. This is a character who is vegan, in theory, and we had him have a moment at a steak restaurant that we didn't love, and we talked about both you and Steven, our guest, Will's partner, not the Steven of this universe, talked about why that was problematic and the lack of vegan and vegetarian representation. But we don't really go into it very much. And given that it's now come up even more on Facebook, and given that we've now answered one of the questions that we were wondering about, i.e., did he eat the steak? Because it turned out he did, which is very much what I was not hoping for. And there's another vegan character introduced who gay representation. He wants to murder children.
Right.
Yeah, possibly. Paul, what's your take on veganism 2.0?
It didn't get better this episode.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, first they're like, okay, so I think he said a bite of steak, and then, turns into this murderous guy, is kind of like how he spun it. And, I agree with Steve's comment from last week that they are kind of like conflating veganism with like this sort of like, meek, kind of like don't really, operate with a lot of confidence in the world,
Mm-hmm.
And, there's an aspect to which I do feel convinced by Steven as a vegan. I'm like, yeah, I can see that guy. Like, it's not like it doesn't work, but it's just, It's like, if there weren't so few portrayals that I've seen in media that were like positive or even neutral representations of veganism, if like you didn't have like John Oliver, who's always trying to be so, inclusive and everything, still just constantly making jokes about, vegan food on his show, that's like all about like trying to talk about issues that are like big systemic issues and the oppression of, I guess he just cares about people, but like, then it wouldn't bother me so much to see like this character in this way, because I know there's some things about that representation that do resonate with people, maybe not so much in the veganism, but like the acting in a way that is not in line with his values because he's so whatever's going on there right at that moment. So I didn't love that. And then they say, Emmett's like, oh, I'm a vegan too. And like, first of all, maybe we believe him, maybe we don't. I think probably he's telling the truth, but I don't know. But like, yeah, he kills children, which I don't know. I mean, you can construct an argument. I probably have, but like, it's like, it's not a great look. It's like, all right, to represent vegans, we're going to have Jeff Bezos, and then to represent vegetarians, let's go with Hitler. It's like, I mean, yeah, I know there's some like shitty people who like are like only care about animals and not people or whatever, but like that's not really the core essence of the idea of veganism. And if we had broader representation, like then some instances that were maybe like not the most flattering wouldn't feel like these stereotypes that are negative, or like this like hypocrisy, I think, that a lot of people like want to see. And like find a way of being like, oh, well, you're a hypocrite because blah, 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 blah. Or you don't adhere perfectly 100% to everything that you say you want to be trying to do. yeah, it's just it's not fun. Like, I'm over it. There are some good representations in fiction. You know, I mean, like Bones is one in the series because I think Emily Deschanel is vegan, and she was like, I want the character to be vegan, and you know, by a certain season, she gets her way. Right, she's the star
from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think you've talked about being
right.
I think he's vegetarian.
He's
not
vegetarian.
Vegan,
yeah, I mean, I think he may or may not eat dairy. I forget whether that comes up. I think it does, but yeah, and that's to me that's a positive representation, and it's fine that it's like you have Sokka who's like, oh, that's so weird, like I want meat, and it's like, but nobody's like, you're bad because of this, and it's not. It's like the whole conclusion of the show is, I mean, Will, you had that great meme, right? Like, didn't you share the one about like
Probably.
what he was, because nobody offered a vegan option or something, and then he's like, I don't think you're all taking this Avatar thing too seriously.
Right,
Oh.
Yeah. Like, it's not that there are literally zero representations. I mean, there's a lot more than there used to be, right? But like, maybe there's not a lot more. There's a few more, and a few of them are positive, but like very, very few. And so it's like, maybe introduce a character who just happens to be vegan, and like then have one who has this with this conflict. Like, just maybe do that, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it would be better.
I don't know if it's comic canon, but in Teen Titans, Beast Boy is vegetarian.
Yeah,
For the
that
sake
makes
of putting it
sense,
out there.
right? I mean,
awesome.
and I mean, like, Danny Rand is supposed to be vegetarian, but like
Right.
in the Netflix MCU, they were like, oh, let's have him eat donkeys. That'll be funny. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
And isn't there also? I think
Luke
this might be
Cage
an-
has a vegetarian in it, actually.
Oh, maybe it's in Luke Cage. Isn't there? I feel like there's some MCU show, maybe this is one you're talking about, where there's a character who's a vegan, but he also turns out to be a corrupt cop who almost kills everybody. Is that Luke Cage?
That's
or
what
is
I'm talking about. Yeah, I was gonna not
Okay.
spoil it for Luke Cage because some people are maybe just finding that, but yeah, that's cool. Yeah, there's a cop who I don't even think he's stated to be vegan or vegetarian. He just always gets like the tofu wrap or like something with, you know,
Right.
General Tso's tofu or whatever, and it feels like, and I'm like, oh yeah, that dude's definitely a vegetarian, you know. And it might have been
Right.
stated, I'm not sure. And then he turns out to be a corrupt cop, but like to me, that's kind of fine, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So that to you is not an example of, oh my God, why does the vegan have to be the bad
He's
guy?
not the
again?
worst character in the show.
He's definitely not the worst character in the
also true.
show.
Also
You know,
true.
he is a corrupt cop. There's a lot of there's some corrupt cops, you know, and it's like that's to me an instance of neutral representation where it's like if you only ever have the villains be vegetarian, like that would suck. But it's like his vegetarianism is never like made a joke out of. It's just
Right.
kind of incidental, you know, which to me is like, let's have more of that, of like every kind of representation, right? Any given group of people or vector of identity or however you want to say it, like should be represented in like all manners, I think. Not like negative in terms of at that, but like, yeah, you should have some villains that are whatever, anything, right? But like you should also have some heroes, and then you should also have some characters. It's like, this is just a thing about this character, and it doesn't have to be central.
And I think it's important because this is why I think that's important because this is why we got into this discussion about what happened on Facebook. And there were some great people. This was all in the Stranded Panda Facebook group, which we're not in. I definitely recommend joining. Also, a great podcast. We get into great conversations there. We also do on the Ethical Panda Twitter and Facebook group, which I'm trying to push more, but that's another story. And part of the conversation was about, well, why did he do it and what happened next? Because one of the things that I was suggesting was that maybe, you know, to me, what I saw in that moment, and I found it actually very relatable as someone who's had real mental health struggles, was someone he's basically being gaslit by his own brain, let alone by everyone around him. He has no understanding of which way is up or down. And I had moments like that where I walked into a Walmart to buy something that was to me like I would never, ever do. Other kind of long-standing principles that I broke. And I've talked to many people who've been in similar situations where and it may just be because like you're not even thinking about what you're doing. You're like only half conscious. Some part of it might be like, I've held these values all my life and now I'm questioning everything. So why the hell am I still holding on to this? So I could see a lot of reasons why Steven would make that decision in that moment, especially because like he doesn't grab the waiter. He doesn't say, oh, let me have a steak. The waiter he's basically offering the path of least resistance as the waiter is just being like, well, you want a steak, right? You want this, you want that. And so to me, from a mental health perspective, I found it incredible representation. But realizing that it was coming at the expense of something, a different kind of representation, I think is kind of shit. It's kind of bad. Like I don't want it to be like that.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunate. And especially it's funny because you made the point as we're going back and forth that it wouldn't make a difference if you ate the steak or not. The steak has been ordered. That's like one more piece of meat that's out in the world, and now a new one has to be made to replace it. Like, yeah, from that perspective, it doesn't matter. To me, I think it mattered because of what it says about his character in terms of his values, in terms of, to me, there's a big difference between, yeah, he's a vegan, but he doesn't take it seriously, versus he takes it seriously, and in this one moment of extreme weakness, he faltered.
Right.
And so, yeah, them casually throwing in that he ate the steak, I was like, I wish they'd picked something else to show that his main values are being challenged. But even that, I think they're not really... It seems like they're not treating it as seriously as I would have liked to by having it being like, oh yeah, I ate the steak, and maybe bad thing. Like, he seems to have some regret about it, but it's just not handled the way I was hoping it would be.
Yeah, I love that was relatable to you in that way. And I'm sure many other people, right? If like 1% of their characters up to this point had been overtly vegan and like maybe 5% had been vegetarian, like I feel like it would play differently, Right. It's like a lot of these things are like, whether certain actors should play certain roles and stuff. Like a lot of that is within the context of the world we're living in. Mm-hmm. That's different than like overall. It's like, yeah, theoretically, maybe anybody should be able to play anybody, right? But like in the context of the cinema that we've had in our lifetimes or before our lifetimes, like it's not a good idea because there's a lot of people who don't get roles, and then there's a lot of things that have been portrayed horribly, and it's like we're not there yet, I feel like, Yeah. So it's like, yeah, trying to be like, oh, but we're having some vegan representation and we're going to throw, these other things on top of it. And it's like, it just didn't feel like it was a good fit. And I do feel like, ordering the steak, going to the place, like even going, I'm like, what's he do? Like, why did he even go? Why didn't he call her and be like, hey, let's go somewhere else? Or like when he saw her, like say something. And that's kind of just like the personality of this character, right? To an extent. But like, that part just, it just feels a little off. And it's like, it's not that I don't think there's any difference. Like, I mean, him eating it, like, I'm like, he probably got sick. Like, I'm fairly certain that my body could not digest a piece of animal flesh at this point. Like, it hasn't for 38 years now, I think. So, like, that's a long time. Like, I know people who were vegetarians and stopped being vegetarians. And, like, the first time, I mean, they even, like, had, like, some beans that had some, like, animal fat in it. And they got sick, And, like, that is a thing, But, like... Yeah, it's just, it's for a show with so many other things that I really love. And I will say the beginning of the show, I felt some of what you were talking about also in terms of it kind of felt like, oh, okay, can we get to the next part, And then we did, and I thought that was glorious. But, yeah, maybe find a different thing to demonstrate what they did with what you related to. Without kind of like, giving vegans like, again, another one of these things. It's like, all right, okay.
It left a bad taste in the mouth. It was a fly in the soup. And now I think we're out of... I can find 5 more food metaphors, but we should just move on. So yeah, let's talk about... one thing. Was there anything else ethical in this episode? Something about justice and punishment.
Oh, justice.
Yeah. Well,
okay. So
if
we're gonna go into that whole conversation, one thing I wanted to point out that could spark an entire other episode, but the way Stephen Grant sees himself. So when he's talking to Mark in the bunker, he says, "I don't care how handsome you are."
Right.
When they're the exact same person.
Yeah,
it's just about how Mark holds himself.
Yeah.
Compared to how Steven presents himself.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
It was right before he said, "Oh, I'll have one piece of steak."
Let's actually start there before we get into the Emmett and the justice of it all, because I love that. I don't know much about dissociative identity disorder. I don't know if that's what's actually happening, or like one of these is like a false personality or something. Putting that aside, but either way, what it's looking like, I feel like they're doing such a good job of showing those as two distinct personalities. All the reflection stuff, the acting by Oscar Isaac is just incredible. What do y'all think about how that's being done?
So impressive.
Yeah, the acting is like, I mean, he's playing two characters very convincingly. And
the makeup isn't even done differently for us to like figure out. It's all his like body language and his posture. He
looks different without like having his face changed or something. Like, you know, I mean, I think his hair is different, right? As Mark in the mirror, I think. Maybe.
Yeah, his hair is like out of his face.
Right. It's styled differently. It's not like a different length or whatever, but it's I find that aspect of the show extremely compelling. I'm interested to see a little bit more of Mark now, you know, now that we're in Egypt and now that he's, you know, in control. But yeah, I really like the Steven character. And I think it's so, I don't know, just the fact that he looks in the mirror and like sees his own face and thinks that guy is so handsome, but he doesn't think he's so handsome. I just think it's really powerful, like in terms of just like self-image, you know, ideas. Like that's how people feel a lot of the time. And it's like, I think it's easy to like, I personally, like my current physical form doesn't like really match my residual self-image so much to like sort of reference the Matrix a little, you know, and like in a way that like I probably am more self-conscious about how I look than I would be if I was like relying just on like how other people react even, you know, and it's like whether like how we perceive ourselves just does not line up that well with how others perceive us. And, you know, that's not to say that we should be more concerned about how other people perceive us. But it's just like, yeah, something that you might not like about yourself, about how you look or even your personality or whatever, someone else may love that, you know? That might be totally what someone's into. And so it's like, I don't know, to some extent, it's like, obviously, like the hope is that like we can learn to like love ourselves as who we are and accept ourselves and all that.
And it's kind of a two-side thing. 'Cause on the one hand, like, yes, self-acceptance is great. And like, you shouldn't need to be attractive to others or care about what others think, especially in a world like ours where beauty standards are so utterly ridiculous. But also confidence is sexy. Like you said, just him holding himself, you know, like Steven walks into a room and it is so clear that he is apologizing for being in the room. You know, he's sort of like, I'm sorry you have to look at me. Mark walks into a room and is like, you're welcome. You know, and like, it's the same person, but that confidence, it shows so much. And Will, do I remember correctly that you said that in the comic, Steven is not English? Because I thought I remembered someone saying that originally Steven was not English. I was wondering why they would do it. I now think that giving the two of them different accents really helps to distinguish which one is which in a way that I think is just great writing, if that's what's intended.
Probably. In text form, really the only accents that stand out are like Southern accents and Russian accents. Otherwise, you somewhat like Scottish, rely on someone saying, "Oh, I can tell your British accent from a mile away." But like other than that, you'd never actually know.
Right. Yeah,
so yeah, it's probably for us.
That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So now let's get into the meat of this great conversation that Steven. Sorry. Paul was giving me a great look. Let's get into the substance of the conversation.
Okay, let's go with that.
And this is the moment where I was watching it and I was, I knew Paul had, this is the moment where I was watching it. I was like, oh, okay, that's our episode right there. There's a lot to talk about it clearly, but Steven and Emmett, is that his name? Yeah, Steven and Emmett get into this great conversation. And first, just Emmett like introduces him to this world, and I thought this was such a way of doing things. Like, to me, some of my favorite villains are ones where society is treating a lot of people badly, and then here comes this person who's taking care of the societal problem, you know, and like people are being fed, people are being sheltered, people are apparently like treating each other well, and they're able to leave their doors unlocked in this neighborhood that used to be like really bad with crime and stuff like that. And the only problem is that they're dealing with it by killing people who do bad things or who might do bad things.
Right.
So even before that question, like, what did you think about the way they introduced Emmett's little like mini utopia in downtown London?
I like that he specifically specified that they're speaking Mandarin. I thought of you in that scene, Paul.
Yeah. Oh, I got some words about that.
Were they not speaking Mandarin?
I mean, they were trying to speak Mandarin. They were alleging to speak Mandarin. Like, we were watching it, and when he started speaking, and we're both looking at like, so just for clarity, I have done like the Duolingo course in Mandarin and can recognize Mandarin. I think I can speak it better than Ethan Hawke did, but, not fluently or anything. My wife is from China originally, and she speaks Toisanese, which is related to Cantonese, which is not exactly like Mandarin. But, like, we've both heard enough Mandarin that if someone's speaking Mandarin, we're like, oh, that's Mandarin. I hear this word, and that word, and I maybe know what they mean, and I maybe don't. When they started speaking, I thought they were speaking, like, I don't know, like definitely a language not even from Asia. Like,
oh no.
And then when on the screen it popped up like Mandarin, we both just burst out laughing like, what is that? And I've seen people on Twitter have some responses to it. I'm sure, just in terms of representation, the fact that Mandarin is often used, or like, Cantonese as well, as this like demonstration of a character's skill and accomplishment. Oh, they did something so hard, like learning Mandarin. It's like, it's not the best. I would love to hear more Mandarin in movies. I loved hearing it in Shang-Chi, although it would have been nice if they spoke Cantonese instead, since they had a largely Cantonese speaking cast and it's a much older language, blah, blah, blah. Okay, enough of that sidebar. But like, I love the idea that they're like, oh, we should all learn at least 3 languages. And I'm like, yeah, but maybe like learn them? Like,
well, but that's actually my question then is, like, they're not super geniuses. They're just people learning languages. Did it sound like they were like second-year Mandarin students who were getting it wrong because they're learning and they're not very good at learning? Or did it sound just like is it possible?
No, that's how I sound. That's not how they sounded. They sounded like they were speaking a different language. Like, I would have to go back and listen to it a bunch of times, but it was painful. It was painful, especially
That's
him.
Unfortunate.
I was like, okay, because it had popped up Mandarin, and I was like, okay, I could see how what she's saying is like Mandarin-ish. And then he spoke again, and I was like, what are you doing? I had a friend who'd like learned a little bit of Cantonese from someone in LA when he was playing poker, and he started saying some things to me. I was like, what are you, like, it's hard because it's like, I feel like it's not that hard to learn kind of the tones, but on the other hand, it is hard. Like, it takes a lot of exposure, and I feel like you can't necessarily just have someone be like, this is how you do that, and then you repeat after them. Like, I think you probably need to expose yourself to a lot of a tonal language before it can then feel very natural. Like, I can think sometimes in Cantonese now because I recently took 10 days off from doing anything except I would listen to children's stories in Cantonese. And like, they just sort of soaked into my brain. And now I feel like I'm sure, like when I speak to my mother-in-law, she laughs at me, but she knows what I'm saying. Like here, it's like, I don't think people know what he's saying. So it does not sound like a second-year Mandarin student. It sounds like maybe someone who did the first level of Duolingo.
Okay.
Which,
I mean, like, I would love it if that was intentional, in that it was sort of like, these people all think they're doing so much, but who knows if it actually is.
The way
it wasn't.
It was
you
definitely a rub in your face.
Got it.
You wouldn't do it that level
I believe
if
you.
it was intentional,
Yeah, that makes sense. So what else do you think, though, about that kind of little utopia they built?
I love it. Like, I'd live there. I mean, I don't like the whole killing a bunch of people part, especially, before they did anything. I'm against that. Even if they did something, I'm still against that. Right. But like, it seems like a pretty chill place aside from, the murder.
I might have missed it, but like, how is that considered saved now? Is it just because they're keeping the like police and government out?
Oh,
I'm not really. That was one of my questions. Was sort of how is this little? Because clearly it's been going on for a while. They didn't just start
right.
this like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And like, yeah, London is not a walled off city where you can't cross from one neighborhood to the other.
Yeah, this
And-
isn't Pennyworth.
Yeah, exactly.
Spoilers
I
for
was
Pennyworth.
I am kind of curious, like what the rest of London thinks about what's happening here, you know, and like what do the police think? Are they paying taxes? What about local
Right.
people who are just like, oh, I'll go wander over there and have some food, you know? I'm kind of curious about that part. Clearly,
He's got
I mean,
these
like, there are-
places all over the world.
right? And there are
Right.
cops who are part of his cult, so you know, there's all things
Yeah.
happening.
The first place that they showed was in the first episode was like, I think it was in like Switzerland or Austria or something.
I think so, yeah.
Because
So-
I mean,
something
they had German
mountainous,
on
yeah.
their truck.
Yeah,
I mean, it could have been
somewhere
Germany, but
the
maybe
Alps and
Bavaria.
mountains or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what Emmett's influence does that that the citizens consider themselves saved now.
Right, like maybe he's got a power besides hanging a cane on their arms and holding their hands and either turning them to dust or not.
Which he
You
didn't
know?
even do for the guy at the end of the
Right.
episode. He
Right.
took the scarab from him and then just decided to off him.
Yeah, which to me says like he's definitely not what he's saying he is,
Yeah.
No witnesses.
you know.
And-
Right.
To me, there's a couple things there. One is, it's funny, we keep pointing out the flaws. I do love this show. I wish that I'd gotten this scene before the scene in the Alps, or at least before
Oh.
Emmett being involved in the scene in the Alps, because I felt like if I hadn't already seen him in the Alps kill the old lady
Mm.
who hadn't done anything wrong yet, if I hadn't seen that, I think I would have been somewhat taken in. And I would have been somewhat like, wow, he's doing good things. I don't think maybe he's not the villain.
Okay.
Maybe there's something really interesting here. And then we get to the reveal of, oh yeah, by the way, if a kid's going to grow up to do something terrible, then like off with the kid. And like to me, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Did you like, there was some parts of what he was saying where I was like, okay, I can see maybe there's a thing here, but I just don't believe you. Were you kind of having that feeling watching him, or did you got to get a little taken in by his approach to things before we get to, killing little Johnny?
I feel no. I really like the sequence of scenes. Like if they just did a little better on these representation fronts, I would just unequivocally love this show. Although again, the beginning of this episode, I was like, with the car, and then he's going with them. Like, I don't know.
Right.
But I didn't mind knowing that like he's clearly doing some like bad things. But I think the idea that I saw was like sort of the idea that this is kind of like this like necessary evil or whatever, right? That it's like,
Right.
And I do mostly buy his viewpoint as like, I don't know, a reasonable way of looking at the world. Like, if you absolutely knew for certain what someone was going to do, it makes a lot more sense to stop them from doing it than to try and punish them afterwards. I don't really believe in punishment, you know, in the idea of retributive justice. This seems like preemptive justice, which also doesn't seem. I mean, the whole world of justice is. I got things, but like, but it makes some sense. It's like, yeah, let's, you know, if Thanos snapped his fingers and the 50% of the people who were most likely to do certain things were the ones who all got dusted, like maybe the world would be great after that. I don't really think that's how humans and society work exactly. I mean, I do think there's an extent to which like a lot of things are ruined by a small number of people taking advantage of what a large number of people are willing to put up with or go along with.
Right.
Though usually that's the people in power, not like, you know,
Yeah, it's always a question
the
of,
boogeyman. But
is it just that the people who are bad are the ones with their hands on the levers of power? Or that lots more people would do terrible things, they just don't have their hands on the levers of power, so they're not...
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable question, you know, and I think it will remain unanswered, you know, because you...
And I think part of what I was seeing there, and Will, this kind of gets back to, maybe this is a possible answer to your question about, you know, why they're so believing in this, but let me know what you all think, definitely. I think there's a tendency that humans often want, like we want clear, bright lines, you know? We talk about this on the ethics show all the time, you know? And one of the things that happens, if I can point to the bad people and say, they're the bad ones, and we've drawn a line around our community that those people are outside, that now tells me that everybody inside is good and right and pure. And I think that might be where some of that saved feeling comes from. And I know like a lot of like early Christian communities that came here that believed in predestination, this was kind of often part of their belief system, was that like God would tell you who are the good people, who are the bad people. And often it was like because he put a mole on their face, so you know they're the bad people, or, you know, they have this color hair or whatever it is, or this color skin or whatever the horrible thing is. And so, so I wonder if that's part of why the people have this level of assurance, is because Emmett's giving them this idea of like, no, if you're here, you're good. You passed the test, you're fine, everyone else around you is fine, so you don't got to worry about anyone else.
Yeah, I could see that. The only argument against that is that old lady was a member of that village. Or
Right.
I think.
But I think
like,
she hadn't been judged
he had
yet,
a gathering.
right? I think that's what he was doing. He was like weeding out.
Yeah. He had a gathering, and there was like, who will be the first to volunteer to get, you know, scaled or judged or whatever. Yeah. To go back to your kind of big picture question, I personally am super anti preemptive justice. And I think that is primarily fed by all of the media I have consumed over the years that deal with preemptive justice. It never works out. I agree with your stance, Paul, of you know, justice post or post justice, or what the phrase that you used that was super fun. I've never heard before. But I feel like the approach of, I know someone's going to do something bad, and so I will be there when they're about to do it. It's like having proof of intent and then stopping. I feel like that's like the sweet spot of when you enact your cosmic godly justice.
Yeah.
It's like, you have a gun in your hand, it is loaded, it is pointed at this person. Now I will stop you.
Right.
And like, I would throw in just one other option, which would be to find a way before that point even came up to approach the person and not necessarily just like try and talk them out of it, but try and figure out like, okay, why is this person going to end up doing this thing? Like, are there ways to, you know, change circumstances so that's not
preventative
what they're
justice
going to
versus like actual preemptive punishment.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Where the goal, because I think that's part of the problem. Like, to me, if you can predict these things, which I don't think you can, I'm going to get into that in a second. But yeah, how can you, like, to me, the issue is now, how do I stop the harm they're going to do, not cause more harm in this sort of idea of, well, we now know they're bad so they can suffer. And to me, this is such an important issue. And it's like the Joker, Batman sometimes brings this up. But we also see it in our society so often, just with the whole like good guy with a gun. You know, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I think that rhetoric is awful, because I think generally the only thing that, again, this is the Joker idea, the only thing that separates a good guy from a gun versus a bad guy with a gun is that one of them had a really bad day. You know, we've seen so many statistics that like a lot of domestic violence shootings, for example, are, you know, the good guy with a gun comes home after he's gotten fired and has a bad day, or comes home and finds his partner in bed with someone else, or, you know, the person we think is a good person can actually turn out to do something bad under some circumstances. And so, yeah, this whole idea of we can predict it, I guess especially because here's something I'm not clear on, and one of you two know. Is it that, what's the name of this god?
Khonshu?
Not
Or
Khonshu, the Ammit.
Comment.
Yeah, it's like Emmett. Okay, Emmett serving Ammit. That's a little on the nose, but fair enough.
Yeah.
That is it that Ammit can predict the future, or it's that Ammit can look into someone's heart and know that they have like they have the intention that they could commit a terrible crime at some point? Because like they're similar, but I feel like it's a little bit different in terms of what's the basis of judgment here. Does one of you know which one it is?
Okay, so in Egyptian mythology, when you die thing, but they weigh your heart to determine if you go to heaven or hell. So I know that conceptually there's a practice of weighing the heart versus weighing the spirit.
Right.
But I feel like it's presented here as a future prediction thing. Like, you only have one path you're ever going to take, even though we already know that there's multiple timelines. So, I
didn't see in a time travel world.
So
multiversal of them.
I don't know. It's presented as a future timeline thing, I feel like. But I think in Egyptian lore, it would be a heart capacity thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's where I'm not quite clear. Like, I don't know if it's Amit can tell that on June 6th, 2029, you're going to do something bad.
Right.
Or if Amit can tell you're the person who, if you got really bad news and you had a gun, you would do something bad. But I don't know the exact details yet.
I think the story has not made that clear. I don't think it's attempted to make it clear. And I think it's not even clear that it is actually Amit giving such judgment. Like, that's what Emmett is claiming. But, like, you know, I'll believe it when I'm shown real, you know, real proof of this God. Like, that's, you know, that's, as an atheist, I just, you know, also just for representation, I think people with mole representation has also been very bad in fiction throughout history. I just want to kind of throw that.
Austin Powers' fault.
No.
Well, and so, like, you're talking about how we haven't seen Amit on screen. We have seen the other god.
Yeah.
And one thing that I liked is you could tell a fairly basic story of, like, one god good, one god bad, serving one god good, serving one god bad. That other god ain't it. Like, I'm not sort of in love with the god that Mark has been serving, and I think we're certainly supposed to get an idea that god is also not a bastion of good, just, ethical behavior. Is that kind of where you're seeing it as well?
It feels to me like it's complicated. I like that it feels like it's two gods who have their own ideas of justice that apparently some of the other gods don't really dig, you know? Like, it's like it's interesting, you know? And I mean, that's the thing about justice. That, like, I don't know. I think justice is kind of in the eye of the beholder. So it's like, if you say a thing is justice and you convince people it is, then it's like, well, you're probably going to have a lot of power. But, like, that, I mean, it's kind of just made up, you know? Like, you know, to me, like, on the subject of, like, preventing versus punishing or whatever. And I think some people think the idea of punishment is to prevent, like, to basically dissuade people from doing something that might receive punishment. Other people think it's another reason.
Point out all statistical evidence shows that that's not true. But yes, that is the prevailing belief.
Right. Yeah. Right. No, exactly. But you know, from coming at it, like, from the standpoint of veganism, like, the idea of, like, preventing suffering or reducing suffering, I think I feel like that does tie in very well here. And so I think making both characters vegan or one claiming to or whatever, I think it does play well with, like, what they're playing with in terms of justice, or, like, making a world that that has less suffering and less pain and less violence, right? It's just that the one guy wants to do it through violence and the other wants to do it through violence. Yeah. So
reactive violence versus preventative violence.
Exactly.
Or proactive violence, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because all of the lore we've gotten about Khonshu is from his previous, maybe even failed avatar. Like, right. I kind of get, with Emmett, I kind of get, like, a Sinestro vibe. I'm just like, I was part of the Green Lantern Corps. They weren't, they didn't, you know, they weren't good enough. And so now I'm with the Yellow Lantern Corps. Like, it kind of feels like that. But
he's bitter about his ex. Like, that's pretty clear. He's like, I didn't dump them. They dumped me. The other way around.
Yeah. But then so for Emmett to tell us that Khonshu has been banished by the other 8 gods of the Ennead, it makes you like, is he?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Like, is he just buttering Steven up to get him on his side? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what I mean is that I think it would have been easy, and maybe this wouldn't fit the comic books. That doesn't matter. So maybe I'm complimenting the writers of this, or I'm complimenting the writers of the original comic books. Don't tell me yet. But like, it would be easy for the story to be like, no. Mark is like just as much of a devotee as Emmett is, and the fact that like Emmett is like, yes, this is the God that knows, this is what we have to do, and Mark is like, I just got to pay my goddamn debt and make sure that my maybe about to be ex-wife doesn't get wrapped up in this crazy God's plans. Like, that's really fun.
Yeah,
I like seeing that dichotomy, and it, like you said, Paul, it makes it all so much more complicated and feel interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like Mark is a hostage of Khonshu, and then like Steven is a hostage of Mark, like, you know, in terms of just like who has control here, and yeah, I don't know, I'm very curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said it last week, but there's not a whole lot for me to compare to the comics here. There's a lot of original takes and storytelling going on in this show.
That's awesome. I need to run. Do you two want to keep talking, or should I just wrap the whole thing up?
All the things I have to say, I can do in literally any episode. So,
okay.
I don't have anything else specific to touch on, so I'm happy to wrap now.
The freeze frame was really weird, by the way.
Well,
sorry.
Yeah. That there's that one moment of freeze frame. I was also going to say I love, but also just on the confidence thing, I love how much Steven changed when he got in the suit. You know that, like, granted, it's in part because he like, I can rip the fender off a car.
Right.
But also he was just like, maybe I can, like, maybe I'm not so bad. Like, that was just a fun part of the, like, confidence discussion. So
for sure.
There's so much more we could say. Unfortunately, I need to run, but we'll keep this conversation going. Between the four of us, I think someone's going to be able to come on every week to talk about the show, because there's going to be so much to get into. But for now, thank you all so much for listening. Check out all the stuff that Will and Steve are doing on Hype is My Ethics. Paul has been putting out some great poker videos. Check that out by looking for Zen Madman on YouTube. And of course, all my stuff you can find at theethicalpanda.com. There also you'll find our contact information. Let us know what you think. I have myself, everybody else involved. Thank you all so much, and have a great day.
Technically, it's Hype is My Superpower.
If you're interested in our new theme song, like what the heck was that? That is a track from my old band Villain's Lament. The track is called Villain's Lament, and the band was named after the track, so I call it preponymously named track Villain's Lament. It's available probably by the time you're listening to this podcast, all the places that you can find music. So yeah.
That's amazing. We use Steve's band for our music.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that. I'm so happy to know that.
Yeah.
It's really good.
That's
I
awesome.
really enjoy the theme song. It sets the mood really well.